Happy Wednesday, Sullivan family. Hope you are doing well. We are back with another edition of Navigating the Unknown. As folks are joining us, feel free to jump on. Give me a thumbs up down in the comment section if you can hear me. That makes sure that I know that this live video is actually reaching your ears. So if you can hear me, feel free to give a thumbs up down in the bottom for us so we know that things are working. To give a little teaser of the conversation that is coming for today, we've got two really good friends of mine joining, Kaveh and Brin. Kaveh is with the Center for Social Impact Strategy, and Brin is with a group called Watson Institute. And both of them are thinking about creative ways that we can redesign what higher education and learning looks like. And they're doing it in two very unique ways. And so we'll be talking a bit about some of the organizations they're a part of. They are also individuals that have their hands involved in a lot of different projects. So we will have a chance to talk with them a little bit here. But as we're waiting on people to join on the call, we always like to give you a bit of a teaser into a tool that is really helpful in the Sullivan community. And so because we're going to be talking about education and learning and creative ways to go about designing your own learning journey a little bit, one tool that I wanted to share today is something called the Open Masters program. This is from a friend of ours, Alan Webb. They started this program maybe about 10 years ago. But if you go to their website, openmasters.org, they have a series of cards. These are called the Journey Deck cards. And this is actually their first version. So this is the old deck. They now have a new and refined version. So this is like the vintage model. But the deck of cards is actually really helpful. And so Open Masters is of the belief that you should be able to design and craft your own learning goals, right? So what is it that you want to have some mastery in? And how can you create a community around you and the structure and the rigor that you need to actually develop mastery for some subject or some issue that you care about? And so this deck of cards are simply a bunch of different tools that you can use and little activities and facilitation tips that you can actually apply to your own learning journey. Some of them I think are kind of relevant, and so I just wanted to give you a little teaser of a few of those before we jump into our call here. One of them, if you have been a part of the Sullivan community, we do this at almost every one of our events. It's called Dear Self. We love letting people write a letter to their future self, right? And we'll hold on to those letters and mail it off to them in about a year's time. But one of the activities in this deck of cards is a little bit of a twist on that. And you actually write the letter as if you were your future self, right? So a year, 2 years from now, write a letter to your current self, just documenting what happened. What did you do along the last year or two? What were some really critical milestones and things along those lines? And so it's just a way of putting yourself in a future headspace to hopefully bring some clarity on what your future steps might look like moving forward. So one activity that I thought was interesting, another series which could be relevant to folks that are spending their time in quarantine right now. We're around matchmaking and mentor speed dating. And so there's one activity around here, this idea of how do you reach out to a mentor. And so they have a card called Mentor Dating, and the idea is just to get playful with it. Find 10, 15 people that you think could be potential mentors and find a creative way to reach out to them to just go on a date, right? A mentor date. Just to see, hey, is this a good fit? What am I actually looking for in a mentor? And so there's an activity around that. And then a reverse of that, they have an activity in here called Play Matchmaker. And Play Matchmaker is about stop thinking about yourself. What do you need? What are the people and networks that you need to support yourself? But actually focus on someone else. So for a week, try to identify, maybe you hear a friend of yours saying they want to start a garden, they've got some time at the moment on their hands, but they have no idea how to do that. You secretly go out of your way to connect them with a master gardener or something along those lines, right? And maybe you do it anonymously. So it's a way to think about how do you build support networks in your life that don't necessarily need to be centered on you. And then the last activity I'll share here, and then we'll jump into our conversation, is one called Not To-Do List. And I thought this was actually very relevant. A lot of people are talking about all the creative things they want to do during this time. And this activity, the Not To-Do List, is actually giving you permission to let go of some things. So many of us have lists of stuff you want to accomplish. Mine is sitting there on that wall right there, all those sticky notes. But sometimes priorities shift. The things that you wanted to focus on are no longer there, and yet they still mentally are stuck on your to-do list in your head. And so the not to-do list activity is simply giving yourself permission to put things on a not to-do list. What are stuff that you do not want to have to focus on moving forward? And so anyway, a whole bunch of cards here. Again, thinking about how do we reimagine what education and learning looks like. Openmasters.org. Feel free to go check them out from our friends. So with that being said, as we've got some people on the call now, hopefully you are having a good midday, midweek, having some lunch. Feel free to join us on the conversation today. If you have questions, feel free at any point to drop them down in the comments section or in the question bar, and we will be sure to share them on with our friends. So we've got Kaveh and Brin joining us today. We're going to kick things off with Kaveh. Kaveh and I met, man, I don't even know now, a couple years ago probably. He is doing some work with the Center for Social Impact Strategy out of UPenn, which has been doing some great work. They just ran an online virtual convening, which I had a chance to kind of peek into for a little bit, which was really fun. But he's also got his hands in a lot of different projects. Kaveh's been a fun thought partner to bounce ideas off of, especially when thinking about experiential learning and all of that kind of stuff. So we will kick our conversations off here with Kaveh. We'll see how he is doing. Let me into the call here. All right, we got a connection. How's it going?
It's working. Cool. Awesome. Hey, Spud.
Hey, man. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well.
So I don't have to stand this whole time.
This is cool. This is great.
Yeah, welcome to Instagram Live. It's where I spend all of my Wednesdays at noon for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I love this. I appreciate you bringing me back onto Instagram. It has been a few. I think it's been over a year actually.
Well, I'm glad to play my small part in getting you back in the social media, whether that's a good or a bad thing, who knows? So
yeah, no, it's a welcomed thing right now. I think it's time.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for jumping on. These calls have been a fun chance for us just to share with folks in the Sullivan community what people are up to, how they're navigating all of the uncertainty and unknown around COVID, and when it comes to social innovators and creative change makers, right? Everybody's sort of tackling things in a slightly different way. And so we just wanted to kind of peek inside people's heads and their world, what's going on. So was wondering if you could share with folks on the call a little bit of who you are and what your work typically looks like. And then maybe we'll get into how things have been creatively disrupted in the last month.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been a month. It's been a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
So quick background about me, I guess. So I have a couple different titles. One is that I'm the creative director of a center over at UPenn called the Center for Social Impact Strategy. So I think you mentioned a little bit before, but we basically create a lot of leadership programming for folks that are looking to build social ventures, either on their own, within organizations, and we do it across residential programming. So we'll bring a bunch of kind of leaders together for 10 days, and we all live together, bring professors, whatnot, really have it be a kind of a whole human experience.
Right.
And we started there, then we got into online learning, and now we do a lot of hybrid education as well. So we do a lot of like hybrid executive programs that, again, is very purpose driven, and that tie into some master's programs at Penn. And then outside of that, I kind of do more leadership development trainings as well. So I work with the Obama Foundation on their Scholars Program, Aspen Institute, IMF, a few different organizations that are all mission driven, but really trying to figure out how to build programming that supports folks in basically doing good without burning out, while being strategic, while being mission driven, while also kind of, satiating their own values as well. So that's probably an ambiguous way to say what I do, but
yeah.
What I do is also very ambiguous.
No, I can relate. So welcome to the club. I'm very curious because you gave us a quick teaser into some of the different groups that you're connected to, and probably have your ear to the ground on in terms of how they're responding to things. And as I've been chatting with folks, especially those of us who are in sort of the leadership development, professional development, personal development space, some organizations are responding and saying, hey, there is a very clear need to develop these skills moving forward, right? And so let's double down our efforts, let's pivot, program offerings, all that kind of stuff. And then I've also been hearing folks sharing, we can't even think about that as a priority in the future, right? That's got to be tabled. We're not even going to go there. And so I'm just curious, like, what are you hearing? These skills that I think you do such a good job conveying and teaching through the different programs that you run. How are those skills showing up now? Are groups recognizing the significance and importance of it, or do they just have other priorities? What have you been hearing around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a tension there, right? Because on one hand, what we see at moments of recession, enrollment in a lot of master's programs go up. It has a lot to do with optimism, right? And in the general sense of optimism, sort of in the economy and in like public sentiment. And so we see a little bit of that, but also right now we're in this moment where folks have had to sort of pivot really quickly, right? And around really dire situations as well. And so we're seeing a lot of kind of crisis approaches popping up, right? So it's like it's hard for us. We've had to pivot a lot of our learning, and I'll sort of say I think there's an immediate response to this and a long-term response to it. The immediate response is that a lot of our learners and a lot of the folks that are in these fellowship programs are in these really tough transition moments, right? And so we've had to sort of take back the curriculum and make it incredibly trauma-informed, have it allow space for people to sort of reorient their expectations of how efficient they're going to be, about what type of work they're going to do. They have to start to see themselves as the beneficiaries of their work and not just the people that they're working for, so like practicing self-compassion and all these kind of pieces. So there's this short-term kind of response that has to get built up. And I think once that's, we as like a community need to regulate first, I think, right? So we need to sort of come to terms with this reality, see our own role in it, learn how to like take care of ourselves in this process, and then we can start to, I think, double down and invest in all the responses that we need to make kind of systemically as a result of this, right? So there's like so we're seeing both, but I think we need to sort of we're still dealing with the immediacy of this right now,
Totally. Yeah, you mentioned trauma-informed approaches, which I think is, there's lots of buzzwords in the social innovation space, right? And you and I, we bounce them around all the time, but that, even is a relatively new one for me as well. My wife does work in this space, so obviously I hear of it in that way, but I'm just wondering if maybe you could touch on that, because I think it's a really important lens when we think about, social innovation education. Let's just use that as the broad umbrella
whatever
right
that
now.
means. Yeah.
Right, there's lots of different approaches. Debbie might be on the call right now. Debbie Brock is doing a lot of work in that space. And so I'm just curious, like for folks in the higher education space or learning space, how might a trauma-informed approach add a different lens to some of this social innovation effort that a lot of us are working on?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, it's interesting when we talk about, so I have a couple of immediate thoughts to that, right? So folks that are working in the social innovation space, I think more and more, given the trends of what we're seeing in the corporate sector and government sector, the way we used to teach, first it used to be just social entrepreneurs, then we moved into social innovation. Now we're realizing the way we teach those learners is applicable across like multiple industries, right? Because so many folks are interested in having careers that are oriented around purpose. The sentiment of, our role with the world is increasing as, issues arise, and, climate change and it's a lot more pervasive, right?
Yeah. And
so social innovation education, I think, is also kind of, blowing up, and we're starting to learn how to make that applicable, across the board. Kind of going back to your question of how does sort of trauma-informed approaches relate to this, I will say folks that work in the social innovation space, from the last 6 years of how we've trained these folks, majority of them are really lonely to begin with, right? So if you're in the business of creating social change, you're inherently going against the grain of the area that you work within, or a community that you're working with a problem. And it's usually a problem that's systemic. It's usually a problem that you might not see the solution towards in your lifetime, maybe, or you're not getting those positive feedback kind of mechanisms very often. So it's tough. It's already tough. And so we had to make without even realizing it, a lot of our curriculum had to start focusing on the self and on how to prevent burnout. We realized burnout was one of the like number one. It was like I used to call it an epidemic, but now I'm realizing that's an even more loaded term. But it really was. I mean, it was the reason why most social entrepreneurs ended up failing was burnout. So we had to incorporate a trauma-informed lens, a while back. What's interesting is that we've now started to bring that same approach to like our undergraduate education, our curriculum, our graduate curriculum. I mean, across the board, because it turns out like everyone has everyone, there's uppercase T trauma and there's lowercase T trauma, but like we all experience it, right? And so the contribution of trauma-informed approaches, I think, to all of us is that it creates the space for us to regulate ourselves and arrive, right? So I think there's this gap oftentimes with education where you jump in and education makes these assumptions that the human is ready to learn, ready to internalize. It's kind of like economics where you assume a rational, perfectly rational human in the models, and education sort of does the same with its lecture style methodology. And it's just not the case, especially right now. Not only in social innovation curriculum, but like in the era of COVID, or in the era of, where we're realizing trauma actually is incredibly pervasive. So we need to create moments where people can regulate, where teams can regulate, so that they can actually start to engage in, an educational discourse or dialogue.
Yeah. I'm curious, what have you been doing to prevent that burnout piece? Since it's something you recognized beforehand, right? But now you're in the middle of talking about it probably on a more regular basis with the program.
Yeah.
How are you personally navigating that?
Yeah, so much of it is about just creating space, right? It's really, really, I think the hardest thing is to have one person take care of their own well-being. It's much easier to have a group of people take care of each other's well-being. So one thing that we do is I always say kind of with our curriculum or at the center, all the executive programs, master's programs, everything that we create, I always say it's informed by sort of like 4 H's. So head, and most people come to the center seeking out like head support, right? And it makes sense, like it's a university, and it's what most of our marketing materials appeal to, which is just like cognitive tools and frameworks and like all that head stuff. But it turns out for people to actually create social change, they need a lot of heart support as well. And the heart support, I kind of think of as like, courage, the root word being cur, of being able to source your worth and your courage intrinsically instead of extrinsically, right? So giving people that confidence again. The other H is hands, focusing on accountability and on community, right? Like we realize that social innovation work, you can't do it by yourself, right? At the end of the day, and you need community. And then the 4th piece is health. And I'm seeing some shout outs about my shirt. Thank you.
I was going to make that same comment as well.
This is so funny. I have some old friends on here who are probably like, what is Kaveh doing on Instagram? This is great. I didn't realize I was missing. Yeah, this is fun. I miss you guys. And yeah, so health is probably the other piece. But the other way I sort of describe our center, like the way I go about education and going about this is, we sort of bring people together who are ready to run this like lifelong marathon together, this lifelong race towards really where they're never going to reach the finish line, right? If your goal is to address climate change, you're not gonna hit the finish line in your lifetime, right? But they're willing to run this race forever. So we bring all those people together, we introduce them to each other, we tell them like how other folks have run in the past, what to watch out there, what some barriers on the road might be, what are the best shoes, the best tactics, the best this, the best that. We line them up, we hype them up, we get them on the starting line, we say ready, set, go, we send them off, and then they run this race together, kind of like creating ideally a self-perpetuating, self-sustaining group, cohort. And then we stay back, wave them off, and then take care of the next group, right? So built into that methodology and that like ecosystem is health, like learning how to identify when like your knee starts to hurt or you start to hurt. And then we can't expect someone to do that for themselves, but it is much easier to create communities where they do it for each other. That's sort of the way that we approach it.
Totally. Is there, I'm curious, as you're thinking and hearing probably stories of higher education, what happens in the fall, right? Like people have very much been in a crisis response mode this semester because it hit in the midway point. Summer, right, is sort of a weird space, but then the fall, like, are there pieces that you're excited about in terms of, hey, there's a ripe opportunity here to introduce a different type of learning or a different type of approach or something along those lines? Like, what excites you at the moment when thinking about it?
Totally. Oh, yeah, no, I am. Well, first, I was surprised. You mentioned earlier that we did a number of these convenings. We had to bring together like 100 and, so almost 140 folks from different countries. And this was way in the beginning. So we canceled our on-campus gathering. It was this 4-day gathering where all these folks were going to fly in. We canceled it before Penn even closed. So we got pushback, understandably. And then within 3 weeks, everybody sort of understood because the world started shutting down, right? And it turned out, and I was really nervous going into this, but it turned out that we were actually able to build community online. Like, and maybe it was people's willingness to engage in a way that they hadn't before. Maybe it was kind of the design of the, we were like more willing, and we all are in ways, right? Like we're all doing like squats together on Zoom now and like, dance classes together, right? It's like we're willing to engage with technology in a way we've never been before. And that is yielding like pretty incredible things as a result of that, right? Pretty incredible results. So I am really excited to see how we're going to now actually leverage. We're becoming more vulnerable through technological platforms out of necessity right now. And I'm really excited to see how that sustains itself even after this is done, right? Like we had it was incredible, right? The type of connections we made. And I'll say, like, if anyone is out there sort of looking for ways to reliably create those connections, a lot of the same tactics that we use to create community in person do apply online. Like you have to sort of pivot a little bit here and there, but like one thing we used was liberating structures, right? It's this methodology that's been around for a long time. It's what I think you know about it too, but like it's just a great way to co-build kind of experiences. And it turns out a lot of those things apply to online settings as well. So it's been really cool to actually move from this place. These have always been questions that I've had, but I've, been like, oh, maybe one day someone will do a dissertation on this, but like we're proving these things now in real time, which is really cool.
Totally. Yeah, for those that are just jumping on the call here, we've got Kaveh with us. He is with the Center for Social Impact Strata, the GY, I got cut off there. The Social Impact Strategy Group there over at UPenn. We're talking a little bit about one of the recent gatherings they just hosted online and some just kind of approaches to trauma-informed work. So if you've got a question for Kaveh, feel free to drop it down, whether it's around education or where he got his shirt. Either is totally everything is fair game on Instagram Live. So.
Oh my God, that is terrifying.
Right?
This is why I was off social media, but I love it now. I'm hooked.
So I'm curious, what does your next couple months look like? I know you've been responding in the immediate to some of these programs that you had to pivot online. How are you spending your time moving forward? And what are some of the projects or opportunities that are exciting you on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're still in this like we're in like a responsive mode still, right? So we're still sort of taking these problems that are so immediate, and I think we're putting enough of the fires out that we can like kind of come up for air and like start to be strategic. But in this, like for example, we're trying to figure out how to completely rethink a commencement ceremony right now. So that's coming up in a few weeks. And we're going to be relying a lot on video and a lot on kind of, again, these liberating structure methodologies. And I don't think this is going to change, right? Like we're planning, like the latest news, at least at Penn, is that we're planning for fall 2020 to spring 2021 being a combination of hybrid and in-person. And of online classes. We don't really know, but that's where things are that's where the science is sort of guiding the decision right now. So I think we're going to have to learn I'm excited about how to learn how to do like compelling community building online, right? And then also, I don't know how to do this yet. It's something that I'm trying to figure out, but how to be creative given the weather that, that we sort of have to sit in right now. It sort of feels like collectively we're all under a rain cloud. And so how do we reframe this to create, moments of inspiration, and I suspect that human connection will play a big role in that, I think.
Totally. Yeah. I've been really curious, right? Because I think for a lot of folks, dealing with the unknown is a very uncomfortable thing. For folks that are obviously in kind of the social change space, that somewhat comes with the territory, but we're sort of all getting a crash course in it right now. And so it'll be curious once, a couple months out, once people have got this first, big dip in the unknown pool, how that will reframe the way they think about other parts of their work or their personal life. What areas are they willing to navigate a little bit into that unknown space that they maybe otherwise wouldn't have before? And so those are some of the things that I'm curious about. And right, education obviously is sort of this cross between those two of helping people do that personal journey, but then they're also institutionally trying to deal with those unknown budgetary problems and all that kind of stuff.
So 100%.
Yeah.
And sitting with that. And it brings up a good point. I mean, we were talking about this as a staff yesterday, and we were saying that the fact that everything just sort of came to a halt also has taken away a lot of our own vices, right? I was thinking even for myself, I travel a lot for work. I bounce between all these different things. I keep myself very distracted with whether it's with projects, whether it's with travel, whatever it might be. And on one hand, I've been really grateful for the opportunity to slow down, but now I have my problems have nowhere to hide, right? There's no way to shove them under the rug. Everything's coming up right now, right? And we're finding that that's the case. Inevitably, if we're in this state for too long, it's that the stuff pops up. And so I think a piece of learning how to navigate uncertainty is a huge piece of that is also learning how to sit in discomfort, and learning how to reframe discomfort, right? And not have it be this thing that we are so trying to get rid of as soon as possible, because the mechanisms that we used to use to get rid of that discomfort are no longer, around, or at least readily available. So we have no choice but just to start to learn how to deal with that, right? And so we're trying to incorporate a lot of that stuff in our curriculum as well now, sort of showing folks how to sit in that discomfort, how to use that discomfort as a data point, right? Distance yourself from it, investigate it, break it up into smaller pieces, and understand what pieces of it, make you uncomfortable, what pieces of it are manageable. And then also empowering people to be able to make sort of micro changes in their everyday. I always say, as we're doing action planning, a lot of times we jump to extra large ideas, right? So we're I want to fix this massive goal, and then it feels really daunting and we don't do it, or we start to do it and then we mess up one day, and then we call it the what the hell effect kicks in,
right?
And you just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But we sort of teach a lot how to break that up into tiny pieces. So instead of having an extra large idea, what's the large version of that? What's the medium version? What's the extra small version? Something that you could do tonight, tomorrow.
Right.
And then more importantly, it's learning how to be compassionate with yourself when you don't do it, and then coming up with a plan. So when you're making that action plan, being okay, so I will inevitably fail at this in the next couple of weeks because things are absolutely out of control right now. So how can I not? Of course I'm going to fail. What will I do when I fail? And coming up with that plan ahead of time. So we've been sort of reframing all of our tools in the context of today to incorporate a lot more self-compassion, to incorporate a lot more kind of day-to-day micro changes, and show people that they actually have agency when it feels like a lot of the agency has been taken away given the circumstances.
Totally.
A lot of reframing.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you do good, and I really appreciate being able to follow kind of your thought process, is you pull different bodies of work and inspiration together, I think, in really creative ways. And so, anytime I have a conversation with you, I feel like, a new door has opened of oh, I need to go learn about liberating structures or trauma-based, work or whatever it might be. And so I'm curious, as you think about folks are going to have to get comfortable dealing with discomfort, are there areas of inspiration that are kind of perhaps surprising or unexpected that you think we can learn from? And this is a totally, maybe you have no answer to this question, so this is a spitball in here. Yeah, is there some body of work or a story or a field that you feel like, man, there's something that we could really learn from them when it comes to how do we deal with discomfort? Because that's going to have to be a reality that all of us get used to way more frequently moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it differs per person, right? So there's all these different types of interventions and methodologies that resonate with some folks and are and don't with others, right? So right off the top of my head, meditation. Meditation right off the bat, and I do a type of meditation called Vipassana meditation, which is all about sitting. The idea is that you sit still, for an hour or two at a time, and your back hurts and your head hurts and your arms hurt, and the idea is that you sort of literally sit in discomfort and deal with that. That's a much more kind of like, spiritual approach, but then there's methodologies out there, even design thinking approaches this, but a little bit more from a cognitive capacity where it asks you to reframe. So you like think through it instead. So it's like, oh, this is data that I'm gathering about myself. How can I break that data apart? How can I derive insight from this information? So it's like a cognitive distancing from the discomfort, right? Whereas the other one is more of like a spiritual kind of like puts it in more of a spiritual context. So there's different approaches out there, I think, around this. What's interesting is that like I taught a class recently at Penn called Self and Society. That's all about, and this is before the pandemic, but it was all about, how do we marry the truths of ourselves and our values to societal needs, and how do we understand where the intersection of those two things are. And I was doing a little bit of research just to see what's out there. And I ended up kind of like, one of the doors I went down was philosophy. And I started to read all this stuff about self-actualization. And it like went back millennia, like it literally went back millennia. And we're like, the funny thing, after you read all these different things, starting from the pre-Socratics to Nietzsche, kind of coming up, we've been talking about this for like literally millennia. We're no closer at figuring it out than we were then. Right. So it's like an age-old issue. But I think the good news in that is that humanity has been thinking about this for millennia. So the answers are there. But I sort of goes back to like another theory I have when it comes to like any of this self-help stuff, which I know there's a lot of that stuff floating around right now. I find it really interesting that humanity tends to value newer a lot more. So it's like the newest iPhone, the newest theory, the newest, that we think that that's the most pertinent. But in almost every other system, whether it's like biology, philosophy, the older something is, the more valid it is because it's proven itself. So I've sort of, especially in these moments, try to apply that same lens where, if I'm getting advice, I sort of prefer it to be really old and have proven the test, work through the test, the test of time per se. And I think there's a lot of answers once we start to go back to these ancient texts. That's where I turn, at least.
Awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of time, and I want to thank you for jumping on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Spud.
Eager in the wings to jump on. But if there is one thing that folks in the Sullivan community could do to rally behind a piece of work that you're doing, or is there a resource they should go check out? What's one thing that you could kind of leave with the Sullivan network? Yeah,
let's see. So honestly, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think we're in a moment where we need to take care of ourselves, of each other. And I think it's self-compassion is like a difficult thing to do inherently, but I think we can practice that by doing it for each other. So it's a simple thing, but I think writing a thank you note to someone that you haven't reached out to in a long time is a great place to start. And once you focus on other people, it takes your mind off yourself, and turns out we feel better when we help others. So even if it's just a simple note to send to someone, a loved one, whatever that might be, someone you haven't reached to in a while, I think it actually goes a long way. It increases our own capacity for compassion.
Totally. I got a handwritten note from my grandma the other day. There was a big spike in my positive energy. I doubt she's watching on Instagram Live, but if she is, thank you, Grandma. So
thank you, Grandma. That's awesome.
Cool. Well, thanks for jumping on here, Kaveh. I hope you have a great rest of your week, but appreciate the time that you're able to spend with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Spud. This was
awesome.
Fun.
See ya.
All right, bye.
All right. So that's Kaveh. Again, with the Center for Social Impact Strategy, feel free to go follow their work online if you're curious and learning a bit more. Up next, I want to bring on a good friend, Brin, from Watson Institute. They are based out in Colorado. Brin is also an alumni from one of our Sullivan schools, Barry, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brin, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So we will have Brin jump on the call here and kick things off. Hey, what's up, Brin?
Hi, I think I figured it
long
out.
time no see.
Long time no see, Spud. How are you?
Doing good. Getting quite used to this little, 20 square feet of my life for the last month or two.
Yes. Well, it's colorful. I'm enjoying the Post-it notes in the background and the beautiful greenery on the wall. So at least, it looks nice. It's pleasant to look at.
It's fake, but nobody needs to know.
That's okay. I won't tell anyone.
I kill plants left and right, so fake plants is my go-to.
Love it, love it.
Well, thanks for jumping on here. I am very excited to hear what you got going on in your world. I want to give you a chance to share for folks on the call who might not know who you are and some of the work that you're up to. Could you give us a little teaser of who's Brin, what's Watson been up to lately, so we can kick the conversation off from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Spud, thanks for the invitation. It's a joy to be able to jump on the gram. I don't spend much time on the gram, so this is like, a reason to dust off the old app and hang out with you for a little bit. Yeah. So I have been based in Boulder, Colorado for the last 2.5 years almost. And I'm serving as the executive director of Watson Institute here in Boulder. So previous to that, I lived in Uganda for 4 years, worked for the African Soup and Education nonprofit, as well as some business kind of endeavors during my tenure in Uganda. And previous to that, I worked in Atlanta for a big organization there. And then I was in college before that. So I just did the little rewind. But currently at Watson, serving as the executive director, I get to lead the campus here in Boulder and also help kind of build out our scaling strategy and our strategy for growth beyond where we're currently located, which is in Boulder, South Florida, at Lynn University, as well as in Guatemala City. So we just expanded to Guatemala City, actually, I want to say 3 weeks ago, and we have plans to bring Watson to 2 or 3 more campuses in the next year to 2 years. So that's our current plan. And just to give a little overview on Watson, if that's what you're curious about.
Yeah, and Watson is one of my favorite organizations out there, and I feel like it's this hidden gem that not enough people know about. So let people know.
I agree. I agree. And so it's so good to hear you say that. So we actually kind of comb the world for budding social entrepreneurs to bring here to Boulder, Colorado. And we help kind of provide an accelerator experience for the work that they're doing in the social impact space. And that could be a nonprofit or a for-profit venture. And this is a very diverse group of scholars that we bring to Boulder. So about 40% of our cohort this semester is from the continent of Africa, to give an idea of kind of the diverse profile of our students. But what we bring to universities is more of a product where look at this. I love it. Miss you too. But wow, this is not good for someone who gets easily distracted, is it? But yeah, so what we bring to universities is a certificate or a minor in partnership with the university, where we recruit students into the university and then we power the program like the intel inside of the university in close collaboration with the university. And that kind of expands our exposure to more students, but also aligns us well with the university structures to bring value to what they're currently doing beyond what they're what they're offering. So yeah, that's Watson.
Yeah, I mean, the piece that has fascinated me about Watson is when I first met you guys, right, it was this small, nimble, like, I often describe things in terms of boats, right? So it's like this little dinghy of a boat kind of going around, like really nimble, can navigate the waters in creative ways. And then I don't know how many years into kind of the evolution, right, you were able to partner with Lynn University.
Mm-hmm.
And, right, universities are these, relatively big behemoths of a cruise ship.
Yeah.
And so it's this really interesting partnership between this small, nimble, like response on the ground type of organization with a bigger institution. And I don't see many partnerships and collaborations like that. And so the piece that I'm curious about, and maybe you can kind of fill us in a little bit of what you've learned, is universities probably in the next year or two are going to have to think really creatively about the way they deliver programs and partnerships and all that kind of stuff. And so you guys have been kind of a couple of years ahead. What have you been learning through those type of partnerships? What do you anticipate things looking like for other institutions across, the world that are thinking about reimagining higher ed?
Absolutely. Great question. And we're definitely still students of this. And I would be remiss if not to say that we are in conversation with universities all over this country and this world, trying to understand what are they thinking in terms of reimagining their next steps, especially considering the quote cliff that's coming in the next few years on the recruitment front, with population growth declining significantly, especially for universities that are dependent on US student recruitment. So we, even just last week, I had conversations with the University of North Carolina, George Mason, and Universidad de Monterrey in Mexico. And those were 3 conversations that all were very different. And they all had completely different kind of solutions for what they wanted the next 10 years to look like to reinvent themselves. What's a common thread that I've identified is that every university is looking for ways to differentiate. And maybe this has been true since the dawn of time, but because of the exposure that students have to not just the university down the road, but the university, in a different country or across the continent now more than ever, and the ability to access those programs, universities are desperate for, or vying for ways to become more differentiated. And the second piece is, recruitment. It's how do we bring in top candidates that can really, bring value to our program. So, and that's really what Watson is able to slot in terms of partnership with these universities. So we are not going in and being the kind of partner that's saying what you're doing is wrong and we're here to create a better program. In fact, it's the very opposite. It's you're doing a lot of incredible work. How can we come alongside you and take the program that we've developed and layer it on top of what you're currently doing to create extra value and to bring in students that would really complement your current program and have the addition of Watson to supplement what they're currently kind of driving towards. So we really see it for a win for the university and a win for the students, and obviously for us as well, because we're getting more exposure to a greater number of students.
Right. So what, I haven't been a part of as many of these conversations, but I imagine to some degree, right, people are in that crisis mode. Everything's been disrupted. And so some people are learning or thinking about how to respond in the immediate term. And others might be thinking about, okay, here's an opportunity to craft a partnership that we might not otherwise have been able to get to the provost desks or whatever it might have been, right?
Yeah.
That here's a door that's now open. And so I'm just curious, like, what is some of your advice for, whether it's a student leader who wants to, create some type of change on their campus, right? They want to think about things differently. What is something they could do? What's something a faculty member might be able to do that doesn't have connection, right, to the entire administration, but they have a class or they have, their area carved out on campus? Like, what are folks capable of doing right now and informed from how Watson operates, right? Because you guys think differently, right? You have a whole different structure in terms of what your classes look like, and it's very hands-on. Anyway, I could go on and just say lots of great things, and I won't. I'm curious, what could people do, right? Whether you're a student leader, faculty, staff, at this point, moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Very insightful. So, you know, I often look to history to help inform the present. And some of the greatest, most profound innovations that have come to us as society have come in the greatest moments of chaos. And that's not to say that we should look at this as an opportunity to create something out of a really devastating moment in our collective history that's affecting all of us slightly differently. But I would be very surprised if this doesn't have incredible implications to this world that are innovative that we would have never had the opportunity to understand had not given the perspective of such a pandemic. So my challenge for students and young leaders, professors, faculty members across the world is to select one of the two kind of perspectives. One of them is that this is a very easy moment to feel downtrodden, and understandably so. Like, this is devastating, and you can really soak into the moment of feeling downtrodden. Or alternatively, you can step into the space of what innovation could come of this, and what am I going to gain as a new perspective due to the fact that everything has been disrupted and looks differently. And I think that Watson is really embracing that second perspective and recognizing and holding equally the fact that this is really hard, and that this is a moment that is challenging. I mean, we've had to turn everything virtual, and that is no small feat. If I had come to my team a year ago and said, okay, team, everything we've ever done, we're going to have to deliver now virtually, they would have said, okay, Brin, we need 8 months. We need to create a strategic plan. We need to evaluate. We need a SWOT analysis. Can we bring in a consulting company to help us? But instead, the pandemic gave us 1 week to turn everything virtual. We did not have a consulting company. We did not have a SWOT analysis on the pros and cons of this. We just did it. And I think that that's like the power of adaptability is something that I'm recognizing in our world right now. And it doesn't come without a lot of challenges, of course, but that would be what I would respond to faculty and students across the whole world with, is what perspective do you want to take in this moment, and how are you going to respond to this, and what are you going to be able to then share back to your self 2 years ago, or your future self in 2 years, that you were able to learn from this and gain from this and innovate upon, given the circumstances. So yeah.
I love that. That made me think of an activity that I sometimes do called alter ego.
Yeah.
Which is, right, if people are trying to design organizations and stuff in different ways, what would it look like if Batman ran your organization, or Rosa Parks, or Big Bird, right? And you just come up with random alter egos and think about how they would design things. But hearing you talk about this is like, what would it look like if a pandemic expert designed your organization, right? Okay, we'd have to move everything online. And sometimes those thought exercises are fun just to see what comes out of it. But then it, again, stays there because the burden of having to do a strategic plan and SWOT analysis, as you're saying, right, get in the way, and nothing actually moves forward. And so it'll be interesting moving forward if people are like, hey, this week we're gonna go into pandemic, right? Thinking 2-3 years from now. This week we're going into pandemic mode, right? And so we're gonna change everything we're doing, and we're moving it all virtual, or whatever that pivot is that people need to make. Like, if that becomes a more regular routine type of thing that our organizations adopt, because man, if I could read less business plans and strategic plans and just like see people actually putting things in action, that'd be way more
awesome.
enjoyable.
We even have this practice called a pre-mortem. So obviously there's something called a post-mortem, which a post-mortem, after someone dies, you identify why they died. It's pretty routine. But what does a pre-mortem look like? So what we do is, whenever we have a huge strategic step that we're about to walk into, we come together as a leadership team, or even sometimes as an entire organization, and we say, okay, if this thing is going to go south, why will it have gone south? And we do a pre-mortem where we actually write down 100 reasons why this will fail. And what this gives you the opportunity to do is, as an optimist, be a little pessimistic. And so that means I am not completely shocked when the event that we were expecting to have 500 people attend ends up having 5 people attend. Oh, well, that was in our pre-mortem. So now I'm prepared for what I'll do if only 5 people attend this event. Or we were planning on raising X amount of money to, you know, in investment capital to do Y thing. Oh, that didn't happen. I'm prepared now because I did a pre-mortem and I'm not shocked that that was the reason that it would have died. And here's how I plan around that. So we actually take all of the reasons why things would have died and we create plans for if we have a red flag going in the direction of something that would have possibly gone down that track for failure. We have a plan for how to avoid that, which I highly recommend high growth organizations looking into developing those. I mean, there's really good a really good case study on British Petroleum doing this, and it was actually a fascinating it wasn't called the pre-mortem, but basically their board said, what would happen if all the oil in OPEC countries were to no longer be available? And it was funny because every other oil company laughed out loud and said, well, that'll never happen. Well, with the oil embargo, it did. And no other oil company was prepared for that devastating economic implication to their oil company, except for one who had already planned for what that would look like. And so they were 6 months ahead of everyone else. And there's, you know, huge outcomes, positive benefits for the organization that had planned well in advance for devastation. So yeah, pre-mortems, all about it.
Totally. Yeah, I just did with one of the nonprofits that I run a whole bunch of scenario planning of like, here are the 6 or 7 scenarios that we could foreseeably see happening in the next 6 to 12 months, and here's how we're going to have to adapt to each one of those. So I love that idea of a pre-mortem. Very tangible thing that someone could do if you're leading a student club, got a class that you're running, is like, what are all the reasons this could go totally 180 degrees the wrong way in the next 6 months? Because those are likely scenarios at this point.
Absolutely. Great questions, Bud.
Totally. Well, I want to also be mindful of time. I know Instagram will kick us off after an hour here. So I want to give you a couple minutes just to share what are some things really practically that you guys are doing at Watson. What are ways that folks can get involved in the efforts that you have going on? You know, I hear you building these partnerships with the universities everywhere. I mean, what's going on? Give us an inside peek so folks can get involved in the Watson Fund.
Absolutely. So like I said, we are expanding. Our key geographies are South America, or excuse me, the Americas, so North and South America, as well as China. We partner directly with universities, so universities that are keen to have partnerships with high growth, impact oriented organizations such as Watson. We just want to talk with, like the conversations we had with UNC and George Mason last week and Universidad de Monterrey were good examples of universities that we partner with. And then also we just challenge young people that are interested in having an understanding of how to orient their career and their life focus around impact to reach out. This is what we do, and we're excited to be able to help folks navigate that in their lives and in the big dreams that they have to change the world. So that would be those would be the two kind of things that I would love to have people reach out to me about.
Totally. And with students in particular, I know you guys have fellows that come from around the world and they live on the different campuses and go through the programs. Are there other ways to get involved, or is that the primary way that students can get plugged in at the moment?
Yeah, so that's the primary way, but we actually have a lot of offerings. So we have something called a master course tier. Oh, Salsa Beer said, I highly recommend. She's actually tuning in, I believe, from Tunisia. Say yes if that's true, North Africa. So this is a good example of a really incredible scholar from North Africa who's an alumni of our program. So if you are not able to actually attend a Watson programmer with one of our partner institutions, I would suggest that you look on our website for something called Master Course Teachers or Master Course Sessions. And those are free sessions that we have expert Master Course individuals teach from around the world. So a good example of this is that we just had Jane Miller teach a master course last week, and we're having Jerry White, who is a co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. He's teaching one next week. And if you'd like to attend that, you're more than welcome to. It's free, it's accessible, and you just find it on our website at watson.is. So yeah, that's
awesome. Highly
Great.
recommend. If you have free time, go check out the master course offerings. I know I got to sneak into one in person when I was out there a couple of years ago. You guys were doing the boot camp, base camp experiences.
Yeah.
So Jerry was great. So
Jerry is
cool.
great.
Well,
Thanks,
you for
Bud.
jumping on. It's always good to see your face and hear the updates of what you got going on in the world. You have never not been busy, so you've always got something
Thanks,
going
Bud.
on.
Gotta keep busy. Well,
Right?
Thank you for the amazing interview. And honestly, Spud, you're doing incredible work yourself. Super proud of you, and have seen you just like blossom and the work that you do. And so many lives have been impacted, honestly, because of you. So I hope that you hear that and believe that and know that. So just wanted to put that on the record, on the Instagram Live record, Spud. You're changing people's lives, and it is amazing, the work that you do. So thanks for taking 30 minutes to chat with me.
Absolutely. Anytime. I'll be on here every week, Wednesday at noon. So if you ever want to jump back in,
Yes.
get a recap of how things are going. So
Love it. All right, man.
Cool.
We'll be in touch.
Good seeing you,
All right.
Brin. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Awesome. So there you have it. Brin and Kaveh, two wonderful human beings doing good work in the world. Feel free to go follow their efforts, again, at Center for Social Impact Strategy and Watson Institute. Definitely take advantage of those master course offerings if you have the opportunity to do that in the coming week. I personally will be adding that to my calendar probably after this call. So if you are curious and want to jump on future calls, we do this every week. We are going to be going live every Wednesday at noon from here on out throughout May. So feel free to jump on. We've got this upcoming week, two good friends, Jordan and Nicole, who both are starting new social ventures in the last couple weeks because of COVID. So one is focused on food waste and food insecurity issues. And then Jordan is working on a project called Pledge My Check, which is helping folks pledge their stimulus check to give to local nonprofits in their area. So we're going to be hearing about what it's like to actually create something from nothing in the last few weeks. So join us next Wednesday at noon, and we will see you then. Take care, friends.